So this is chapter 7, and as a reminder to everyone, the structure of this is very simple. We invite people every month who are somehow featured in the chapter of the book that we're up to. And we don't cover every single element in each chapter, that would be impossible. But we try to use the chapters as a springboard and a chance to reflect on the 50th anniversary. But to remind everybody, there's going to be a major celebration of the 50th anniversary on December 3rd. This is our in-house fun discussion. I'll interview our 3 panelists a little bit, and then we'll open it up for discussion or questions. And to a reminder to everybody, we have to use the microphones so that the people online can hear. So you guys have 2 to share. And I'll remind all 3 of you, we want to give time for everybody, so I need each of you to be aware of how much time you're each speaking, so we have time for everybody to speak. And we'll go for about 45 minutes is our general pattern. Okay, everybody on board? We're all happy for the train to take off? So chapter 7 of Rabbi Cohen's book is titled Days of Celebration and Awe. And most of the chapters of the book are not chronological, but thematic. Some are. This is one of the thematic chapters which explores the ways that we, in the early years up until the 40th anniversary, celebrated holidays. And one of the features of what we've tried to do with these Oneg programs is to try and bring in the voices of those people in the book itself to talk a little bit more, either about things that are mentioned in the book or things that are on their mind. Now, with us tonight, and their biographies, by the way, are all in the Shabbat programs. We do that for each of the Friday night programs. Larry Kay, Judy Ribnick, and Rick Landman, all 3 of whom have been active and essential members of CBST's life as it relates to this particular chapter. Now, they've all been involved in many other things as well, but in this discussion, we're going to focus on holidays, Shabbatot, high holidays. That's the big discussion for tonight. And if you haven't read the chapter, again, I urge you to read them, because I've read this book a million times, even before it was published, of course, working on all the galleys. Every time I read it, I see something new. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So Larry, it's wonderful to see you. Judy, wonderful to see you. And Rick, wonderful to see you. To see you too, okay? All wonderful. So we're going to talk about some of the different holidays. Larry and Judy, both of you became very involved and important leaders of our Friday night service and high holidays. So I want to start with the 2 of you talking a little bit about leadership of the Friday night. And would you each tell, Larry, starting with you, would you tell a little bit of your Jewish background and how did you become we know about your beautiful voice, but how did you learn to be able to lead services? Where did you learn to lead Friday night, Shabbat morning, high holidays?
See, it was really a slapdash thing, because the first 5 years of my life, we were ethical culture. I didn't realize that. There was no Jewish content, and then they sent me to Sunday school, and all right. And in the services in those days, in my temple was mostly English with the cantor kind of.
Where is this, Larry? Where is this?
Bridgeport.
In Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yeah.
So you were in a Reform synagogue growing up?
Yeah.
And it was mostly English?
It was mostly English. I missed the magic of the Hebrew. And then we had confirmation. At confirmation, I dropped out for 15 years. But I was always really proud. I always told people I was Jewish because I learned at the very beginning of my school, tell me to keep going if you have to. I was part of this great extended family called the Jews. Didn't know, families can be dysfunctional, but it was still a Greek family called the Jews. And there's a lot of stress on, the word didn't exist then, tikkun olam. Our goal was the betterment of equality and all that.
Was it in your synagogue growing up?
Yes, yes.
But the liturgy was not something.
Shvach.
That means weak, for those of you who don't know the Yiddish.
Yeah, I mean, by the 80s, things would have changed because, guitars.
So tell your story, not the synagogue. So
my story, in
so
those
how
days,
did you learn how to lead services?
Okay, so after I stopped out of college, graduated in '81. That released a lot of energy in some mysterious ways. I would have never guessed I would have wound up where I was. I borrowed for a year and a half somebody's Hebrew grammar, and I didn't think about it at the time. This was for a course in Yale because I lived in New Haven at the time, and it was really intense. Then I joined a local Jewish community chorus, started taking singing lessons. It really was building blocks I didn't see. And then two of us sang.
I want everybody in this room to grok. Larry didn't grow up in a very traditional Jewish home. Everything he learned, he's describing to you, he learned as an adult. Doesn't that inspire you? You see Larry up there, and people could be intimidated. He learned it all as an adult. His Hebrew is beautiful, his davening is gorgeous, all as an adult. That should be really, that's so moving. Beautiful, Larry, keep going. So you, as an adult, you're taking courses now in Hebrew.
Right,
You're going
and
to
I
a
joined
local...
that chorus, and I mean, some of the songs, like I'd never heard "Oh Say Shalom" before. For example, joining that chorus.
And how shocking that's going to be to everybody here. That Larry did not grow up with it. I just want to, this is when people come to me and feel so inadequate or feel like they don't know. This is so inspiring. Beautiful, Larry. Keep going.
So, learning Hebrew
Yeah.
from a very intense grammar book I didn't know. Joining a Jewish community chorus in Connecticut, and somehow becoming high holiday cantor, and the rabbi there taught me everything.
Synagogue outside of New Haven, right?
There was this little girl that I didn't know named Marisa James.
She was actually a little girl at the time.
She was like
Her
8.
family was a member of the synagogue where Larry became the lay cantor.
No, the high holiday cantor.
The high holiday cantor.
That's later.
Okay.
And I don't know. I just got hooked, and I, joined. There was a conservative synagogue, short walk away, and I mean, tapes. I had somebody tape Friday night chanting, a teaching record for Shabbat morning, a few other things, songs I learned at the chorus, songs I learned from being in that synagogue, and being in their chorus. And somehow I managed to be able to lead services. I actually was for 3 years a part-time cantor at another conservative synagogue in the New Haven area. So I wasn't out at all, not in the 80s, not with that particular synagogue. My partner Bob was mostly New York. I lived in New Haven. My job was in Ridgefield, which is like a 55-minute commute, really. I really felt, in those days I called myself 3 androids, but unfortunately the word android means something else now. Do people know what I mean by android?
Yeah.
I
So
wasn't-
Larry, how did you find CBST?
I don't remember. I knew. My best guess was the Queer Advocate, the national newspaper, but I don't know. I came here a few times in the 80s. I knew a few people here, Rafaela, Jack and Ron, Saul Zalkin. I guess I probably met them through the National Queer Jewish Congress.
Thank you, Larry. I love Larry's story. He's one of the people we look to as the kind of pillar and rock of CBST's leadership. And it's very inspiring, Larry, that it's all that you taught yourself, and then you reached out and jumped in, and now you've become such an important voice here at CBST.
Thank you.
So Judy, tell us a little bit about your Jewish background and leading services at CBST. And in particular, I want you to talk about the Rosh Hashanah of 2001. Both of you were in leadership then. So to talk a little bit about those high holiday services.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here and an honor, really. In thinking about 40 years of involvement at CBST, just about 40 years, I realize that I've been able to bring a lot of my musical background and Jewish liturgical background and grow and be able to share that with people. Let me say a word. I grew up in Minneapolis, and the conservative congregation I was part of, was, I think, way ahead, years ahead of the East Coast in terms of women's participation. So we became bat mitzvah, and we learn synagogue skills. I'm a very proficient Torah reader and learned from the same teacher that Jack Greenberg learned from, Miles Cohn, and led others in learning synagogue skills. It was a very developed program. You know, most kids after they're 13, they stop. You know, you stop Hebrew school. I kind of started to love it. And I continued public school, but afternoon Jewish Hebrew school 3 or 4 times a week through high school, and also being involved in my synagogue, which raised at that time in the 70s, many rabbis actually who went to JTS. Rabbi Arnold Goodman raised up many, many students, so to speak. I also loved music. I played clarinet, I played piano, I was in the jazz ensemble with tenor saxophone and orchestra and band and music camps, along with Jewish camps as well. So I became very interested in Jewish liturgical life and synagogue life, and it was a second home for me growing up in Minneapolis. In college, I studied Jewish studies in Hebrew at the University of Minnesota, but I had been on the Bima already for many years and learned the Megillot and, as I said, learning Torah and different synagogue skills. I think a milestone for me was in 1981, my rabbi asked me to lead an overflow high holiday service in Minneapolis with Danny Siegel, actually, the fundraiser, philanthropist, really beautiful person. And that moved me to a whole nother level, and poo, as you said. I've led high holiday services consecutively since 1981, one of the, for me, a beautiful and very meaningful milestone in my life.
So Judy now leads high holiday services in Brooklyn at Park Slope Jewish Center, right, with Rabbi Carrie
I've been since, I think, 1986 or 87, the part-time cantor of the Park Slope Jewish Center, a conservative synagogue. I'm there one Erev Shabbat a month, and high holidays, and various communal Jewish multi-synagogue kind of events together, like Slichot and many places. So a lot of times when I haven't been here, I've been there. I also played clarinet monthly at Park Avenue Synagogue for many years, and CBST once a month, kind of alternating with Larry at some point for many, many years. But first to say, Rabbi, that when I was at JTS, I was, you know, my identity was, sexual orientation was kind of being explored. And when it became more clear to me that I was interested in women, that I was a lesbian, when a few of us heard about CBST, and I'm thinking J.B. Sachs, who is Mel Rosen's partner, we were both closeted at JTS. I was in a graduate program there in Jewish studies, along with a master's program in social work at Columbia, and there were a few of us who maybe kind of knew, but we attended a separate minyan called Minyan Hamakif that was part of Anshe Chesed. So I've always had an involvement in a synagogue locally near me on the Upper West Side, but kept a foot in CBST. But that first footstep into CBST was like, wow. You know, I had so much deep Jewish involvement and so much musical involvement, and was coming back out to myself, and to come in and feel all these pieces in one place was like a shehechiana moment. I think maybe I cried. And soon afterwards, I realized that I could lend my talents, my skills, and my passion for Jewish liturgical life and communal life to CBST. I found a folder called Early CBST recently, and in that folder it has a few things I wanted to share. One is 5 or 6 pages to all CBST service leaders from the Religious Committee, May 1985, step by step, what you should do as a service leader, what pages you can do, what you had to do, what you had some options on. I want to make mention that at that time, it did say an 8:30 start. You should arrive by 8 o'clock to be prepared.
Services started at 8:30.
And it says you should finish by 10 o'clock. But that wasn't hard and fast. People didn't always finish by 10 o'clock. Interesting to me is that, again, this is May 1985, there's no mention of a prayer for AIDS, but by the time I saw another version here in 1987, we should end by 9:45 instead of 10 o'clock. but one of the required prayers was a prayer for people with AIDS. I did meet my partner Diane first through CBST. Through
This is an
common
amazing
friends.
story. You have to tell the story about how you and Diane met.
We met actually through we met through common friends, including a party that we think Roseanne Leipzig was at in 1985. And then we were paired up because at that time, if you were a new service leader, you were paired up with a more veteran service leader. So Diane had been, as one of the earlier women at CBST, was the rabbi person, and then I was the cantor person. So she was the veteran, and I was a newer person, but she kind of learned that I knew some things also. And then soon enough, here we are 38-something years later. So I'm
See,
happy
lead
about
service
that.
with somebody, and look what happens 38 years later.
And here's a service outline from Shabbat Hanukkah, December of '87, I did with Diane. We prepared a lot. We really took a lot of time, as Joyce works with everybody now. We were on our own more without the leadership of Joyce and Rabbi Klein, but other rabbis. I have a 7th and 8th night of Hanukkah with Diane, and I wrote a note. This is in '88. We had lots of material to incorporate. We did it in record time. And a great service. I put together a song sheet in 1988, 3 pages of songs. I think it was for pride to have along the way. And I have a service here with Yehuda Berger that we did together. Last thing is in Jack Greenberg's handwriting about leading services for family and friends. The darshan was Bill Fern, and the service with Jack Greenberg was Family and Friends Night. I have a note here about participating in Irving and Lou's 20th anniversary in 1994 with the Drosh by Irving Cooperberg, remarks by Lou Rittmaster, and service leader Rabbi Kleinbaum. So I've really, been able to participate and enjoy so many opportunities at CBST, but I want to mention also that when you came, Rabbi, and when you came, Joyce, I think it moved my davening experience to another place, and to begin to work with people like Larry, and that's in addition to people before that. It's kind of BRSK, before RSK, and BJR, before Joyce Rosenzweig. We were more on our own, but it's so structured. I mean, it's amazing how developed things were. But when you came, and Joyce working with you, has really, it raised my davening experience to another level. That we used to sit in Larry's house before high holidays for weeks before Yontif, Yamim Noraim, and Joyce, I think, taught us both Kachko and altar and melodies that we weren't familiar. Raised it from kind of a camper mod, deeply immersed Jewish conservative background to something that was much richer and broader. I'm so grateful for that. And
Beautiful.
Thank you. And just
So great, the 2 different backgrounds that you have and the richness that you both bring.
And just to, before I pass it over to Rick, Rabbi, I want to respond to your comment about the Yamim Noraim of after 9/11. 9/11 happened, September 1st, help me out here for a second. September 11th, 2001, and Rosh Hashanah was just minutes later, days later.
4 days later.
You called a service, I think, on the stoop of the church, I believe.
On Wednesday, the attack happened Tuesday morning, and Wednesday we had a service.
Being in Javits together, Larry, that was, I remember you saying, Rabbi, that the number of people in the room perhaps were equivalent to the number of people whose lives were lost, and to have the responsibility of trying to put into prayer and song and silence what we were feeling then, to say that Unatana Tokef, to do Yizkar, was very, very profound. And to look out at this sea of faces, and to be next to you, Larry, and with you, Rabbi, and Joyce, and the chorus, was deeply embedded in my heart, to have that zchut, to have that privilege and that responsibility to be together and try and lead and walk together during that time. So thank you, Rabbi.
I think people don't always appreciate the leadership and this is so true now also with all of our leadership, it's an awesome responsibility to lead people in prayer and to try and create a deep prayer experience. And the two of you have been such significant parts of that at CBST. So Rick, one of the features that you emerge in this chapter so beautifully are both very fun things like Purim and your role, historical role at Purim. And some of you might not know that for many years Rick was the official dresser he dressed me for all of my Purim. And I always like to say, this is only at a gay synagogue does the lesbian rabbi, the only time during the year she wears a dress is on Purim, and the dress belongs to a man in the congregation. It's like, what could better sum up? But then, how shall we say, I outgrew your dresses, but you continued to be very important in the Purim. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, but also on the more serious contributions you've made to CBST is really making sure that we as a community took remembering the Holocaust not as a throwaway line or a distant memory, but you really made sure the community carried the honor and respect of those who died, both by making sure, and we continue to be one of the only synagogues that observes Kristallnacht in such a significant way, and by being a founder of the gay men and lesbian women, children of survivors group, and Yom HaShoah. So would you talk about what's on your mind?
The biggest thing about the difference is I can't sing. So, but and also I came out when I knew I was gay when I was 7, so I had a different type of situation. I came out in my Hebrew school class at the Belarus Jewish Center at the age of 12. So, and the important parts of my life, my parents were both refugees. My great-grandfather was a Hasidic scholar from Husiaten, and I was given a Torah when I was 12 years old, and my grandpa told me, you have to take care of it, but my Hebrew school that I went to yelled at me so much when I asked if 2 boys can get married, because I didn't want to marry a girl, that I said, you're not getting the Torah. And then I had to explain to my parents, I'm looking for a gay synagogue. So it was my mother in 73 that read about CBST, and the underlying thing was to find a place to bring my Torah. So my life was always different. And to me, Kristallnacht was the night my daddy and grandpa went to Dachau. So when in the 1990s, our parents, children of Holocaust survivors, began talking about this. In the 50s and 60s, no one talked about it. And then I heard that in Brooklyn, the second generation group was being horrible to LGBT second generation people. So, as I often did in the past, I started our own group. We ended up having 35 people from CBST, and it grew to 150 people in 11 countries when I had the internet. And we also finally got the Sheepshead Bay Holocaust Memorial Park to include a stone marker for what happened to the homosexual community during the Nazi era. But I'm going to try to get back into that book. When I read it this time, I saw something that I didn't realize. The first Pride Shabbat service that we had that was outside of Bethune Street came because Yolanda came to me for Gay Pride that year and said, we got Gad Beck. He's a gay Jew from Berlin, but he's like 80. And if we have him in that Bethune Street space at the end of June, he's going to die. It was just so hot and just so crowded. So I was working at NYU at the time, and I was doing a Kristallnacht program because we didn't have, on our Friday night, the religious committee said, Kristallnacht is an event, it cannot be included in the service. You can do an educational program on a Wednesday. So I was doing it with NYU. So with the Bronfman Center and the Deutsches Haus and Keshet. So when Yolanda said, can we go someplace else? I said, not really for our Gay Pride Shabbat, but because Gad Beck was the speaker. I went to the vice president of student affairs and said, if I have 3 or 4 NYU groups co-sponsoring, can we use the Loeb Center, which had 1,000 seats and was air conditioned, to have our Pride Shabbat there? So the first Gay Pride Shabbat out of Bethune Street was at NYU, and that was because of the connections through Kristallnacht. And then we also were in the Yom HaShoah. We at first at CBST had enough people that we had our own Yom HaShoah services for many years, and then it merged into being a community kahila with the other groups, and then we fought to get a 7th candle from the 6 million Jews and the 7th candle for the other victims of the Shoah. On the Purim, I'm looking at that. My Hebrew name is Mordechai, and my grandma and grandpa was Mordechai and Esther. And my grandpa also gave me a Megillah, which I'm still trying to donate back to Germany. So again, part of the strangeness of my life is where everyone else was learning about these things, I would go home. I mean, this is an actual Yuda from my grandfather. I would have these things. I had a Torah in my closet. And when I went to the Belrose Jewish Center, Mrs. Bromberg were learning about taking out the Torah and all. And I said to her, I have one of those in my closet. She said, no, Mordechai, people do not have a Torah in their closet. And when I came home, I said to my parents, why is there a Torah in my closet? So they said, well, because when you become bar mitzvah, you will donate it to the synagogue, and Grandpa's giving it to you now. He brought it from Germany. Well, that was when I was like 9 or 10. Well, when you come 11 and 12, you just don't like getting dressed in the morning. With a Torah, you know, what clothes am I going to wear today? Oh, it's Chaim Lama. Now, so my mother and I went downstairs, and it's pink and yellow. It was a duvet cover. And my mother and I, we sewed it and put a pressure rod, and we made a little ark, parachet, that was on the top of my closet. And then, again, I did bring it to the Belrose Jewish Center. I did have a fight with them, and I wasn't a lawyer yet, but I wrote a contract that on 90 days' notice I could take it back, because I said to them, when I grow up, I'm not going to be here, and you're not going to have it. So they allowed me to leave it there, and then when I got more involved at CBST, it actually came here twice. The first time I brought it here, there was political fights over the jealousy of the other Holocaust Torah, and a human being here gave me a black garbage plastic bag and said, get that thing out of here. And I put the Torah into the plastic bag, and I stood out at Bethune Street trying to get a cab. And who, of course, at that time, Israeli cab drivers, that's all you had. He stops, opens up the door, and says, is that what I think it is? Because you could see the Eitz Chaim sticking out. And he drove me home, and he again stopped the car and opened up the door, and we sang again. I think that's when we did sing Eitz Chaim He. And then I brought it home until Yolanda became president and I became on the board. And then Yolanda said, now is the right time. And Yolanda came, picked it up in her car, and we drove it back. And it stayed here for about 15 years until Rabbi Homolka came from Germany and said he's starting a progressive movement and a progressive synagogue in Munich. Munich is where my father's father grew up. My father's father lived, and my grandfather grew up. And he was coming out as being gay. And they were going to give him a lot of trouble. And I said to him, you know, I got a 200-year-old Torah from the Holocaust. I'll donate it to your synagogue. So it's been it was 2005, but the Torah left CBST, but it's part of its history that Torah was at CBST for 15 years. And it is now at the synagogue in Munich that Daniel Liebeskind, the architect of the World Trade Center, is completing, this is going to be a new structure built. And as a very weird coincidence, of which is full of in my life, I went there to give them the Torah. It was on Shavuos of 2005. I'm standing up there, and I turned. They had on the wall a green. It was a parochet, but it was just a green material on the wall. And I looked at the bottom, and it says, "In honor of Rabbi Berwald from Congregation Beth Hillel, Washington Heights." And I said, "You're not going to believe this, but this Torah, before it was in my closet, was in Washington Heights at Congregation Beth Hillel. Rabbi Berwald married my parents, and that was my grandfather's synagogue." So I said, "Where did you get this from?" A lesbian, I believe, in Berlin, found it in a flea market, gave it to her lover, who was a Jew in Munich, and that's how the parochet ended up in that synagogue. So in today's world, and we called it the Little Torah, but it was 17 inches. It's the same exact measurement as the Torah that we all made here together. The Torah and the parochet are together again in Munich. Well,
Rick's memoir is coming out. The Book of Rick, really? Yeah.
Some of this stuff.
You think I'm joking?
Right. Well,
so thanks, Rick. I'm
Okay.
gonna.
You gotta stop it, right?
But Rick's book is coming out.
No, it came out a year ago. I never told anyone yet.
Anyway, so we have these incredible different expressions of community at CBST through the liturgical and holiday life, whether it's the high holidays, Shabbatot, Kristallnacht, Yom HaShoah, and Purim. And this is an amazing part of CBST's life, which has been the spine of our existence from the very beginning. All different activities come and go, but Shabbat, high holidays, all these different observances. So what I want to do is, for our last few minutes, open it up for people either to ask them specific questions about those things, or if you want to share in any way a particular Shabbat or a particular high holidays or a particular Kristallnacht or a particular Yom HaShoah was meaningful to you. Do you know what I mean? Not in a general way, but if there was a specific one, and for the three of you as well, if there was anything specific. And to try and be brief so we don't have so much time so everybody can participate. Shep?
Rick, can you tell us about May West?
This is a question for Rick to say, how did you come to do
Every
May
year
West?
I would do a different thing, and I did Sophia Petrillo for a lot of years too. And then there was issues between drag queen and trans, and I didn't want to upset any of my friends, so I decided to be like a character impersonator. So it wasn't that I was doing anything in female form, whatever. And then when they gave me chapter 5, at first it wasn't, they gave me other chapters. And when they gave me chapter 5, and I had to go, "Oh," and she dropped to her knees as the king sat on his throne, and she had to reach to touch the tip of his golden scepter. I said, "Oh my God, all the grown-ups are laughing hysterically, and all the kids just think I look like their bubby." So I have been doing drag queen book readings for 20 years with no problem. Also, I was the kiddush fairy on Shabbos. I would hand out the little cups, so that was something. And every holiday, on Pesach, Rabbi Kleinbaum would allow me to read V'hisha Amda from my father's Haggadah that he brought from Germany. So I'm so appreciative that my personality of being a gay Jewish son of Holocaust survivors was able to grow and develop basically from CBST allowing me almost every holiday. As Rabbi Kleinbaum would say, "We'll give you 3 minutes, 4 if you cry." And this is one of the only places that psychologically I felt comfortable enough.
Who here is upset that I give him a time limit? But you get more if you cry, Rick. It's
Right.
okay.
So I'm just saying, every holiday, there's a little something that I try to add.
And you're an incredible part of the synagogue, Rick, and the way that you bring so much richness from your family to all of these holidays. And it's not just, oh, let's talk about the Holocaust. That our Pesach Seder has that V'shehi She'amda from your, is it your grandfather's? Or from your father's Haggadah. This is who we are as a people. And that it's so, we're so grateful to you. We're so grateful to you. Anybody else? Yes, Lori?
This is to Rick. You talk about like your favorite Shabbat and how things just kind of come full circle. I never knew this. That lobe, that was my first time I ever came to CBST. And I came kicking and screaming. And the only reason I went is because I was told there's going to be 1,000 people there. It's in a really big space. Nobody will know you. And so I went. And if you hadn't arranged that, I don't know.
I didn't know that, Lori. That's beautiful.
I didn't know that was from you. So thank you.
If I could just say that a group of us are writing the profile of the synagogue for the senior rabbi search, and one of the things that comes up over and over is the DNA of CBST as a synagogue where we had an extremely learned congregation who led services without a rabbi before the senior rabbi came. And although things have changed, we still have significant congregational involvement. And somehow, it's in who we are that the congregation has a role in the ritual.
CBST very different from the other LGBT synagogues, and there are many things that make, as I keep saying, when I came to CBST there were 25 in the country, and now there are probably 3, and CBST is the most thriving of them right now. And part of the reason is that it's New York City, so there are a lot of the Jewish community in New York City is a very highly educated Jewish community, even though you're from Minnesota, Judy. But you're an example, so that we just have a lot of members who have a lot of Jewish knowledge, which isn't necessarily true in other Jewish communities to the degree. Yes, Liz. Sorry, just, we could hear what the folks
I just wanted to thank CBST for its always kind of incorporating new things. And the first time I came to CBST was in Purim 1996. And as a kid, I had grown up in a conservative shul, not going a lot, but my mother would take me on Purim, and I was always really upset in the final chapter when the Jews get their revenge. And that year, I believe, was the year or two after Baruch Goldstein had killed all those people on the Temple Mount, citing this as a justification. And that year, Hebron. And when it came to that chapter, we chanted it according to the trope from Lamentations. And I thought, this could be a place for me. So, very meaningful.
One of the other features of CBST of that period, too, were some of the, and I know that all 3 of you especially. Another feature from those early years were the controversies that existed and some of the fractious nature and responses to some of the new things that were introduced, including women leading and some of the things of those periods, which, and Ayelet and I talked a lot about how to include things in the book. We chose not to really do it, but I know that Rick, you suffered a lot from some of those terrible fights that happened. And one of the things that existed in CBST in those early years was tremendous fighting over services. What was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable, who could lead, who couldn't lead. And that's something that I think scarred some people deeply, and some people left in the middle of some of those controversies. I know, Rick, you left for a while and came back, thank God. But the ritual committee struggled, and religious committees struggled a lot with figuring out how to have services. So while it's true, Harold, there's a DNA of a lot of knowledge, there's also a DNA of a community that really was at war with each other a lot. And we tend to gloss over that now, but I don't think we should in some ways. It was not a community that was peacefully experiencing Shabbatot and high holidays and all these things. It was when I came to CBSE, that was one of the things that many of you said to me was one of the things that was so difficult. And that is always the challenge of a community struggling to define itself, which is who gets to do that defining. And there were some very strong personalities who were in positions of a lot of power then that did some pretty difficult things as well. So we need to not forget that as we remember our history. It's a part of who we are. Okay, so other comments or questions on our last?
Hi. I wanted, I grew up very, very secular. I was basically a red diaper baby. And CBST was actually my first high holiday service. I know that Rabbi Kleinman was there. I remember, I think it was at the hostel on the Upper West Side is my memory. But I'm just so grateful for the open door policy, because if it wasn't for the open door policy, I never would have been there. So I'm
Irving
just so
Cooperberg
grateful for
created
that.
the open door policy. He single-handedly created that policy for the high holidays. I think it was 1975 or 76. It says it in the book. I can't remember which year that policy was created.
My memory of coming to CBST was unique because I had a friend who lived on Perry Street, and he was a member of the synagogue. And he told me, "You want to come?" I was going, but he didn't come. So I walked up the ramp by myself, and I said, not knowing anything, I said, "These men are going to kick me out because I'm female." No offense, this was then, okay? And I won't mention names, but I will just say that at that time, well, I will mention one name. David Spiegel, I sat by myself, and he came over to me, and we were talking about singing, and he said, "Do you sing?" I said, "Yes." The next thing you know, I was by the piano with them, and I was the only female at the time in the 16th anniversary of the synagogue.
Wow, the 16th anniversary. Wow, fantastic. Anybody online? Sharon, are there any comments or questions? And we'd love to hear from people if you're online. Okay. Yell it to me and I'll repeat it. How much new did you, I don't quite get the question.
Yes, the question.
I
Hang
understand
on,
it's for them.
hang on.
But how
Rabbi
much,
James says, how much did each of you bring what you knew to CBST, and how much did you try to create something new?
Well, I actually was valedictorian of my Hebrew school and Hebrew high school that Michael and I and, about four of us were from there. So I did have a very deep... And actually, that's on the ageism was also terrible. People treated me, I think, a little bit disrespectfully in those back years because I was so short and so little, and they just didn't really acknowledge me. And that one person who gave you a lot of trouble, he gave me that much trouble that I actually left for several years because I was afraid to come here. But my idea of Judaism, and I think this is why once you came, I could take a deep breath. I thought Judaism was a radical revolutionary religion. I like when Abraham in the Midrash smashed his father's idol store. I like that Moses was a community organizer against the Pharaoh. You know, I started the Gay Liberation Front at 17 in my college and had already gone to the march in Washington.
Rick, we have 1 minute
so
left for the
basically,
program.
what I was hoping was that this wasn't going to be just another Orthodox shul where two boys could hold hands. So every time the synagogue was pushing towards women inclusion and everything, it was fine with me. So it wasn't that I was bringing it, I was just going along. So I am, as I said, to me, this is what Judaism really is about.
Larry and Judy, and then we're going to end our, we just get started with so many things. Yeah.
I want to talk more about what CBST done to me. I mean, people have some idea of what I had when I came, and wow, and this memory, when I first came, I'm an extremely shy person. It's been much, 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 much worse for most of my life, less so now. I knew that I would be a wallflower if I didn't start leading services, and that broke the ice. Because if you want to lead services, you sing one song, and that, that's all I had to do. And it just meant so much to know people. Very exciting, because I'd always been a scared wallflower most of my life. The other thing is my experience in Connecticut. I mean, it was the conservative movement, which my kind of movement, but it was the same songs, more or less the same songs all over again, the same chanting. Partially my fault, because I'm not a research person. Joyce, you filled up my life so much variety of music, introducing me to so much music. There's no comparison. There's no comparison. You filled me up so much, and thank you.
All right, any concluding thoughts as we...
Well, just to add to that, the richness, as I mentioned also, and Larry, you expressed, I've been able to bring I think the richness of the Jewish life and liturgical life that I had experienced before, and try to not be like my voice isn't like an operatic voice, but to try and bring people into song and into prayer. And I felt that the congregation was receptive and open, and we were in this together and have been in this together. And tooting a little clarinet along the way has been pretty joyful too for me. So thank you again for the wonderful opportunity to be part of all of this all these years, and to your leadership, Rabbi, for all of this too. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Chapter 7, a little touch of the liturgical life of CBST, and next month is music. So we're going to be looking more deeply at music at CBST. I think it's August 18th. Is that right, Joyce? 18th, August 18th. So that's our next Oneg program, Chapter 8. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So great to be with everyone. Good night, everybody online, on Zoom. Good night, good night, good night.